Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so angry that you wanted someone to suffer? Not just punished. Not just locked away. Suffered. Now imagine that feeling, multiplied by 1,000. And backed by the full power of the state. Because before human rights existed, punishment wasn't about justice. It wasn't about reform. It wasn't even about protecting the innocent. It was about power. And there was no line they wouldn't cross. Imagine being accused of a crime in 2000 BC. No trial. No lawyer. No judge who cared about the truth. King Hammurabi of Babylonia set up his famous laws to make a public statement about his authority and his selection by the gods as the shepherd of the people, in order that the mighty not wrong the weak. But here's the twist. The state used what one philosopher called law-preserving violence. Violence perpetuated by the state upon its own members to reify the state's authority and position. In plain English, they hurt people to prove they could. Dramatic public punishments, including talionic punishments like an eye for an eye, impaling, flogging, and more, were designed to curb feuds and self-help by claiming the exclusive right to kill and maim. The message was clear: you don't get to take justice into your own hands. We do. And we will make you wish you'd never tried. Ancient punishments weren't secret. They weren't quiet. They were spectacles. Everyone watched. Everyone remembered. Everyone was afraid. Let me show you what I mean. Hammurabi's code was one of the earliest written legal systems. It formalized the principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But that's a sanitized version of what it actually meant. When someone committed a crime, the punishment was designed to match the crime in the most literal, brutal way possible. If you knocked out a tooth, your tooth was knocked out. If you blinded someone, you were blinded. And for the worst offenses? Death. But not a quick death. In ancient China, they perfected the art of prolonged suffering. Lingchi, known as death by 1,000 cuts, was exactly what it sounded like. The condemned would be slowly sliced into pieces, with the process deliberately prolonged to maximize agony. Executioners were trained to keep the victim alive for as many cuts as possible, sometimes for hours. It wasn't just about killing. It was about making an example. People would gather to watch. They'd count the cuts. They'd remember the screams. And they'd be absolutely terrified of ever doing anything to deserve the same fate. The trauma. The psychological horror of watching your own body being slowly dismembered while you're still conscious. The knowledge that every cut is deliberate. The helplessness of being unable to stop it. The health impact. Death by shock, blood loss, or organ failure. The wounds were never treated. Infection was guaranteed if you somehow survived. In ancient Greece, they built a device that was pure theater. The Brazen Bull was a hollow bronze sculpture of a bull. The victim would be locked inside, and a fire would be lit beneath it. The person would be roasted alive. But here's the part that makes it truly evil. The bull was designed with a complex acoustic system. The screams of the dying person were channeled through the bull's throat, transformed into the roar of a bull. The suffering became entertainment. The trauma. Being trapped in complete darkness, knowing exactly what's happening, hearing the fire crackling beneath you, and realizing your screams are being turned into a performance for the crowd. The health impact. Severe burns across the entire body. Death from heat stroke, smoke inhalation, or organ failure long before the flames reach you. A slow, agonizing death lasting anywhere from minutes to hours. In medieval Europe, they had a device for extracting confessions. The rack stretched the body by the wrists and ankles, slowly dislocating joints. It was used to coerce information. But here's the thing. The rack wasn't just for interrogating criminals. It was a power tool. It told everyone, We can break your body whenever we want. The trauma. The feeling of your limbs being pulled from their sockets. The slow, deliberate stretching. The knowledge that you're being literally torn apart. The health impact. Dislocated shoulders and hips. Torn ligaments. Ruptured muscles. Internal bleeding. Many victims were permanently crippled. Some died from shock or internal injuries. In the 16th century, England introduced a punishment that would make anyone rethink their life choices. Boiling alive was used primarily for poisoners and counterfeiters. The victim would be lowered into a cauldron of boiling water, oil, or molten lead. The method often caused such severe burns to the lungs that death could take hours. It was considered a merciful alternative to burning at the stake, which could take even longer. The trauma. The sheer disbelief of being lowered into boiling liquid. The instant, searing pain. The slow realization that death won't come quickly. The health impact. Third-degree burns over the entire body. Lung damage from inhaling steam or fumes. Shock. Organ failure. Infections if you somehow survived. The Iron Maiden is one of the most iconic symbols of medieval cruelty. It was a tall, human-shaped cabinet lined with iron spikes. The victim would be placed inside, and the doors would be slowly closed, driving the spikes into their body, piercing vital organs. The Maiden was a weapon of terror, often displayed publicly to remind citizens of the state's absolute power over life and death. The trauma. The claustrophobia. The slow closing of the doors. The feeling of spikes slowly entering your body. The wait for death. The health impact. Punctured lungs, heart, or other organs. Internal bleeding. Infection from wounds. Death by organ failure or blood loss. But public executions weren't the only form of state violence. Interrogation was where things got truly creative. The Spanish donkey was a device designed for maximum pain. The victim was seated on a triangular wooden beam, while weights were slowly added to their legs. The pressure would force their body down, causing agonizing pain and eventual dislocation of the hip joints. It was a method designed to break not just the body, but the spirit. To coerce confessions from anyone brave enough to resist. The trauma. The unbearable pressure on the groin. The feeling of your hips slowly being forced apart. The desperation of being unable to escape. The health impact. Dislocated hips. Torn muscles and ligaments. Permanent damage to the pelvic area. Death from shock or internal bleeding. Rat torture was a method used in medieval Europe to extract information. A rat was placed in a container on the victim's stomach, which was then heated from above. In a desperate panic to escape, the rat would gnaw through the person's flesh. The process could take hours. And the victim would talk. Everyone talked. The trauma. The feeling of the rat's claws under skin. The heat pressing down. The realization that a small animal is slowly eating through you. The health impact. Deep, infected wounds. Sepsis. Organ damage if the rat reached the abdomen. Death from infection or shock. The Spanish boot was an iron boot filled with oil and salt, which was then heated over a fire. It was used to crush and burn the feet, a terrifying method to coerce information. The device was often applied slowly, incrementally, to maximize the period of agony. The trauma. The feeling of your feet being slowly crushed and burned at the same time. The smell of your own flesh cooking. The knowledge that you'll never walk again if you survive. The health impact. Crushed bones. Severe burns. Infections that led to amputation, if you were lucky. Death from sepsis if you weren't. And then, there's the one you've been waiting for. The Judas Cradle, also known as the Judas Chair, was one of the most calculatedly cruel instruments of medieval torture. Its design appears simple, a wooden base topped with a sharply pointed pyramid. But this simplicity made it terrifyingly effective. Victims, stripped of clothing and dignity, were hoisted above the pyramid and slowly lowered onto its tip. The point would penetrate the most sensitive areas of the body, often the anus or vagina. The victim's entire body weight pressed down on that single point. If that wasn't enough, torturers would add weights to the victim's feet. The extra weight forced the body downward, increasing penetration and agony. The process could last hours or even days. The victim was suspended above the device overnight, and torture would continue the next morning. Because of the way the muscles contracted in pain, the victim could not fall asleep. The trauma, the sheer terror of being suspended above a sharp point, the slow, deliberate lowering, the feeling of the point entering your body, the knowledge that you're being penetrated by the state, the helplessness, the inability to sleep, the constant, unrelenting pain, the health impact. The point would stretch and tear the muscles of the anus or vagina, causing permanent damage. But here's the part that's truly evil. The device was almost never washed. If the torture didn't kill you, the infection would. Cuts and tears in the muscle tissue could turn septic, leading to a slow, agonizing death. In the unsanitary conditions of medieval dungeons, this was almost guaranteed. In the words of one historian, by one way or another, the victim would die. And for what? For a confession. For information. For power. The Judas Cradle was designed to make you talk. And everyone talked. And then, there was the most psychologically devastating punishment of all. The oubliette was a tiny vertical shaft where a person could not sit or lie down comfortably. It got its name from the French word oublier, to forget. Prisoners were often left to starve or die of thirst. In many cases, they were simply forgotten, left to rot in the dark, with nothing but their own thoughts for company. The trauma, absolute isolation, complete sensory deprivation, the slow erosion of sanity, the knowledge that no one is coming, that you're already dead, you just haven't stopped breathing yet. The health impact, starvation, dehydration, infection from the unsanitary conditions, mental breakdown. Many died from despair long before their bodies gave out. For centuries, this system worked. But then, something began to change. The Enlightenment brought new ideas about the purpose of punishment. Thinkers like Beccaria argued that punishment should be proportionate to the crime. Beccaria believed the intention of punishment is not to torment a sensible being and not to undo a crime already committed, but to prevent the criminal from doing further injury to society and to prevent others from committing the like offense. The aim of punishment was deterrence, not revenge. If the punishment for a crime slightly outweighed the pleasure or profit to be gained by committing it, reasonable people would be deterred. This was a revolutionary idea. Beccaria advocated inflicting only that amount of punishment necessary for deterrence, treating all defendants equally, dispensing to each defendant a fair trial and a just punishment. Meanwhile, the use of jails and prisons for punishment became more prevalent. As bad as imprisonment was, it was still more tolerable than many of the more abusive methods, which had not yet faded away. So here's the question. Why did we need this? Why did humans once believe that suffering was the answer? The answer is simple. We couldn't see beyond our own anger. We couldn't imagine a world where punishment wasn't about revenge, where justice wasn't about making someone else suffer as much as we had suffered. But today we have prisons. We have courts. We have a system designed to rehabilitate, not to destroy. And yet, we still use the death penalty. We still have solitary confinement. We still debate whether torture is ever justified. We haven't fully escaped our past. The next time you hear about a crime, think about this. You're not just thinking about justice. You're thinking about a history that stretches back thousands of years, A history of power, spectacle, and fear. Humans didn't invent punishment to be kind. They invented it to control. And in doing so, they created methods of suffering that are almost impossible to imagine. But here's the thing. We have a choice. We can continue the cycle, or we can break it. Because the most evil punishment in history isn't the one that kills you. It's the one that makes you forget you're human. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you made it this far, if you sat through the horror and the history and the darkness, then you're someone who cares about the truth. Someone who wants to understand where we came from, so we can figure out where we're going. And that's exactly what this channel is about. It is dedicated to exploring the forgotten corners of human history. We ask one question in every video. What did humans do before we invented everything? Before prisons. Before human rights. Before mercy. Every week, we release new documentaries about the things you take for granted before they existed. So if you want to learn more, hit that subscribe button. It's right below this video. Join the journey. Turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new video. Leave a comment below. Tell us, what punishment shocked you the most? Like this video. It helps more people discover these stories. And if you enjoyed this, please share this video with one person who needs to hear it. Because the more people who know this story, the more we all remember. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being curious. See you in the next video. The end.